even drive? I can. Are you stupid, eh? Are you a stupid fool? Well, why can't you drive then? You can't even drive.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome. I had complained that the Deepest Law theme was not dark enough; it was too jolly, and the Bard, Chris Gard, duly delivered on a new theme for us. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it. Yes, and it's possibly more appropriate for the Adam Curtis season that we're doing here. I'm not going to waste too much time, and this shouldn't be that long of a stream because it's only a short one, the documentary. Just before we get going, I'll remind people, do buy my courses at the Academic Agency: Foundations of Politics, Foundations of Economics, Foundations of Research. That's a good one, nice little cheap one, only £50. Trivium, and all the other courses that are available. Probably the most cost-efficient one to get is the Mega Bundle. That's all of the courses in one. So pick up that one. All right. So today we're going to be looking at another lesser-known Adam Curtis documentary, which is Inside Story, which is a long-running documentary series. I don't know if they still make it, but, you know, it was one of these kind of existing series, and Adam Curtis simply contributed this episode as the producer. Now, I have noticed that the copies of this, I really struggle to download this in order to play it, and the reason I struggle to download it is because it is age restricted on YouTube. And I think the reason that it's age restricted is that there are several times where Curtis shows particularly grisly footage, and he shows like dead people on the screen. So I'm going to try to do my best to skip past those bits so that this video does not also get age restricted. But the basic setup for this is that he's looking at the Iranian Revolution of 1979, comparing it with the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror that happened in France after that revolution, and a similar quote-unquote Reign of Terror happened in Iran. Now, I was thinking of skipping this for various reasons, because it's kind of just a bog standard documentary. And, you know, from my perspective, it wasn't that interesting. However, I have changed my mind, and I will cover it, and I'll tell you why. Well, the first reason is that it struck me that a lot of people may not know that much about the Iranian Revolution, or certainly not as much as I do, for obvious reasons. And the second reason I have decided to cover it is because I think there's a lot of interesting points of elite theory that we will spot. So if you've read The Populist Illusion, if you're a fan of my elite theory stuff, I'm going to see if I can tease out some of the principles that Pareto, Mosca, Michel's, and others have talked about. Because, you know, one of the things we'll find is that some of these revolutionaries are hilariously and shockingly naive. All right, so let's make a start then, and I'm going to have to be try to be quick to skip past the violent scenes where he shows dead faces and so on. Otherwise, this will be age restricted. Every single instance of this documentary on YouTube is age restricted. So if it does get age restricted and the video doesn't make it 7.7 thousand, I'll call an audible. Which is American speak for I'll make a decision as to what happens, whether the series continues or not. Because I thought it would be fun if we always had a target, and the target for the Adam Curtis series, if it ever gets less than 7.7 thousand, the series will just end. Okay. Now, so far, it's not since the first episode, it's not been struggling to make that. So that's good. But if it's age restricted, it probably will. And so if that happens, I may still go ahead, but we'll see. All right, so let's make a start. So we have this. Let me just skip ahead here. In fact, I seem to remember it starts with a bit of the old violence here. So let me skip past the. Let me skip past the bit where it's showing her like dead husband and stuff, because that's probably the bit that was getting age restricted. We'll start. Also, I don't want to hear this kind of woman, so let's start here.
By a mass revolution.
Oh, I should mention, by the way, that the narrator. So this is the first documentary that we will hear Adam Curtis's voice. Although we did watch Pandora's Box, didn't we? So we've already heard his voice, but in the chronology, this is 1989. And if you remember, in Oceans Apart, it was David Dimbleby. In this documentary, the narrator is actually Ian McDiarmid, who is known for playing Emperor Palpatine in the Star Wars films. So the narrator is literally Palpatine, which is pretty cool. I think you'd agree. But I noticed that Curtis is present he narrates some of the sequences for reasons that I'm not entirely clear on. But yeah. So yeah, we've still got other people narrating, and as you'll see, it's still a very conventional documentary. It's not the Adam Curtis style yet. But yeah, with all of those caveats, let's make a start.
But the important thing that occupies my thoughts is the question of what it was all for.
10 years ago, the Shah of Iran was brought down by a mass revolution. 10 days ago, Ayatollah Khomeini, the man who became its leader, died. At the beginning, it was a revolution that united all classes in Iranian society against a corrupt regime that ruled through violence and fear, through torture and execution. Together, the Iranian people took on the Shah and his Western-trained army, and they won. But 10 years on, that unity has disappeared. The revolution that Ayatollah Khomeini did so much to create and shape survives, but it has been transformed. Under his leadership, it has become something that seems intent on devouring its own children.
Now you know it's Palpatine. It's pretty cool, isn't it? The voiceover. Devouring its own children.
Many hundreds of the regime's political opponents have been executed in Iran's prisons over the last year. These are lists of those executed published by just one group. The columns reveal clearly who they were. These are the children of the middle classes who eagerly embraced and fought in the revolution 10 years ago and now were being destroyed by it. The executions disturbed even those at the heart of the regime. Ayatollah Montazeri, who was then Ayatollah Khomeini's spiritual heir, wrote this letter to his leader, pleading with him to
Lovely writing. Lovely writing he's got.
Stop the executions. They are, he says, a disregard for the law and the ruling of judges. They will be seen by our own supporters as no more than an act of vengeance and revenge.
Last year's terror in Iran was unique in the world, even in Iran's history, because at that time all political prisoners were obliged to repent their political beliefs, or they were systematically executed.
Parce que dans cette époque, tous les prisonniers politiques ont été obligés ou de se repentir ou systématiquement exécutés.
It was in fact a liquidation, pure and simple, of all political prisoners of all organizations who refused to repent.
Les tendances qui n'étaient pas d'accord pour se repentir. Vraiment, je trouve pas d'autre mot que liquidation, liquidation pure et simple. Alors,
and I think it's worth mentioning that this is an almost inevitable feature of a revolution, as I've told you before, that is a coalition of different factions against a regime who are united by their want of bringing the regime down. That is before the revolution, but after the revolution happened, one faction of that coalition will basically move, the most organized minority will move swiftly and eliminate the rivals to consolidate power. This has happened pretty much in every major regime change like this, where it's genuine revolution that I can think of. You know, if you think of the Russian Revolution, for example, or, you know, after the Bolsheviks seized power, they had to do away with pretty much all of the people who actually, you know, helped overthrow the Tsar in the first place. You know, and in fact, I talk a little bit about that in my chapter on Sorokin in Prophets of Doom, because he was one such person. He had to survive in the snow for 50 days, and then he fled to America. But anyway, let's carry on.
Rencontre des prisonniers politiques.
How can a revolution come to this? Well, we've read, haven't we, that all
I watched this with my brother when he was here, and we both agreed that this is the worst kind of disguise job on a person ever, because you can hear his voice, you can clearly see the outline of him. He wears glasses. I mean, unless he's wearing some sort of disguise, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if after this documentary he was killed as well, because I mean, this is an awful disguise. Anyway, let's carry on.
revolutions come to this. I mean, we entered it with dual feelings. I mean, on the one hand, we thought we were going to make this into a different revolution. That Stalin isn't going to come out of it, that Robespierre isn't going to come out of it. I mean, so that was one.
Well, you were stupid, weren't you, for thinking that? Because that's what happens with every revolution. So, you know, oh, this time it'll be different. Foolish.
But on the other hand, this revolution, its leadership, was the farthest away from us, from our image of the revolution, right? So how could I have made it into the ideal one, into the one that the Russian one was not, the French one was not, if you like? I mean, into that perfect one.
To many in the West, the Iranian Revolution seems incomprehensible, a unique upheaval that is dragging Iran back to the 7th century. But behind its strange images, there has been a struggle for power that has followed a pattern common to many other revolutions. This film is an attempt to understand that pattern, the road down which many revolutions have gone before, from liberation to repression, the road to terror. The first mass revolution began exactly 200 years ago in Paris. For the first time ever in history, the people rose up as a mass to demand a change, not just in who ruled them, but in the entire social and political system they lived under. They wanted to change the world. The challenge of the revolution was to the age-old order of European rule, to the notion that men were made by God to be unequal. To the world of 1789, this was terrifying. One writer described it as an inflamed passion which has become a new kind of religion, a religion that has flooded the world with its fighters, its apostles, and its martyrs.
Now, I should mention here that one of the most interesting of the people I talk about in Populist Delusion is Bertrand de Juvenel, and he has a really interesting theory of revolution, because he notes that every single revolution always promises liberty. It always comes in promising freedom, and then it ends up being arguably worse or more tyrannical than what it replaced. And he argues that basically this comes about when a system, a regime, is not centralizing as efficiently as it could, and the function of a revolution is basically to maximize the centralization that was not being achieved by whatever the exiting regime was, which is an interesting thing that does conform to what has happened historically. You know, the Bolsheviks were more efficiently centralized than the Tsar, and the Iranian Revolution more efficiently centralized than the Shah was, and the French Revolution more efficiently centralized than the old regime that they replaced.
"200 years later, we in Western Europe still live in the shadow of that revolution. For out of the ruins of the autocratic regime that fell apart that summer of 1789 came an entirely new idea of society. It is the goal that the Western world still pursues. A society where the people are sovereign, where the exercise of power will be guided above all by a concern for individual liberty and human rights." True to its revolutionary tradition, Paris has since then been a home to political exiles, and today thousands of Iranians who have fled the present regime live here. But 10 years ago, the man who was about to become one of this century's most famous revolutionaries was also based here in exile. Ayatollah Khomeini's house in a quiet Paris suburb is now a ruin, blasted apart by a bomb planted by an opposition group. But 10 years ago,
I didn't know that his house was blown up, by the way. That's one thing I definitely learned from this documentary.
It was home to the man around whom the growing resistance to the Shah...
No, I don't want to bring it down the tone, but I always think that the Ayatollah had amazing evil wizard chic. I mean, come on, this guy is rocking a mage look in 1979. I mean, it really is something. But I do think that he had a unique charisma. You don't get to command the crowds that he commanded without this kind of charisma. And as we'll see during this documentary, I also think he has a special kind of mystique where, despite the fact that he's the central figure in this revolution, he's weirdly distanced from it. He's almost like he's aloof from it. He stands above and beyond it somehow, which is, quite an amazing quality for a leader to have. So anyway, let's have a look at him in France in 1978 here.
Was gathering.
It all began here, exactly 10 years ago. It was in November or December, and it was snowing.
I mean, again, what is the point of censoring her face? If they want to track her down and have her killed, they will. So, I mean, the people who were participating in this documentary were not anonymized enough for my tastes, but anyway.
At that time, I was living in Brussels, and like many other Iranians, I wanted to know why all the people were talking about Khomeini. And so I decided to come here to see who he was and what it was he was planning. I had prepared a number of questions. Most of all, I wanted to know what he thought about women, about their role in society, what would happen to them when he returned to the country. And also, did he plan to seize power himself? He began to make quite a speech, saying that under the Shah, women were treated as objects, like dolls, but now they would be free to do what they want.
Let's carry on. Yeah.
And about power, he said, "I shall never take power. I only want to return to my country. I understand absolutely nothing about politics.
Oh, yeah, I'm just a scholar as well, mate.
I only want to go back home."
Je veux rentrer dans mon pays.
On January the 31st, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini left to return to Tehran. Although the airport had been closed against him, he and the group of revolutionary intellectuals around him were convinced that their time had come, that the opposition on the streets was now strong enough to force the regime's hand.
Le sentiment, ce que j'avais en tête, c'était de revoir le pays.
All I had in mind was the overwhelming desire to see my country.
Now that is Adam Curtis. I hope you don't recognise that is Adam Curtis's voice.
No one had ever imagined that we would be able to return, that the monarchy would be brought down after centuries and centuries of rule. That feeling erased everything else.
Monarchique, après des siècles, renversé, retrouver cette espérance de revoir le pays, tout fait oublier tout le reste. Mais dans...
And as people have, these guys are speaking French so far, for some reason.
But in the plane, I could see that person trying to sit in a particular seat, and another person trying to stop somebody else coming close to Khomeini.
L'autre essaye d'empêcher l'autre de se rapprocher à Khomeini. Toutes ces choses-là, oui, de nouveau, m'a fait réfléchir.
All this made me think again. What was going to happen once we had succeeded, were victorious? What would happen to our regime?
Qu'est-ce qui va devenir notre régime?
He was seen as a leader, as a populist leader who would represent all and then who would step aside and who would let democracy flourish.
It's just the naivety on some of these people. I mean, just to ever believe that the man is going to just step aside and hand over the reins of power, you know, to let democracy flourish. Yeah.
Okay? But the first taste of what was to come really was when this interview on the Air France jet coming to Tehran, right? With millions of people waiting for him, estimated 5 million people waiting for him in the streets of Tehran. The interviewer asks him, how do you feel returning to your country after about 20 years in exile? And he looks and he says nothing.
Based. Come on, based.
That's it, nothing, right? That really shook us. The most revered leader, you know, throughout probably the history of 20th century, I mean, in a way more than even Gandhi, because the Muslims had problems with Gandhi. Here you had Armenians, Jews, Zoroastrians, communists, you know, Muslims of various sects, saying that, okay, you know, let's do it together, you're our leader. It's coming to these people. And he says nothing.
That is based. I don't get. I'm sorry, it is based to say nothing.
Et que il y avait des mullahs qui sont entrés.
And then the mullahs came into the plane, and they came up and encircled him and carried him away.
There's your organised minority right there. The mullahs, they came, they encircled him, they took him away. They'd already been organised, you see. They were ready. That little dipshit in the shadows, he wasn't ready. He was like... He had no idea how power functioned whatsoever, but the mullahs did, because they've been at this game for hundreds of years. That's why
we were left behind, and I had the feeling that now we, the intellectuals, our part was over. Our role had been to look after him, and now the mullahs had come to fetch him, to establish their own power.
C'était de l'accompagner jusqu'à ici, et c'est maintenant des mullahs qui sont venus les chercher pour établir leur pouvoir.
Although the Shah had fled Iran before Khomeini's arrival, he had left behind him a government and an army. For the next few days, thousands of young revolutionaries fought together on the streets. They came from all political and religious groupings, united against one of the strongest armies in the world that was crumbling in front of their eyes. Hundreds of thousands of weapons were seized and spirited off by a multitude of revolutionary organizations, each with their plan for the revolution. To impose his authority, Khomeini had already announced a provisional government. The new prime minister would be a man of impeccable liberal and Islamic credentials, Mehdi Bazargan.
And warn everyone that they should obey, because this is an Islamic and legitimate government. So everybody
He's just got epic eyebrows, isn't he? Epic eyebrows.
will obey this government.
Le moment le plus important pour moi, c'était...
The most important moment for me was a few hours after the Shah had gone. Immediately, public opinion began to search for something to replace him with. Then immediately after that, in the public imagination, the Imam took the place of the Shah.
Dans l'image populaire, l'imam a pris la place du Shah.
Because the Shah's departure, after 50 years of his family's rule, had left this vacuum into which Khomeini was then sucked.
I mean, this is because monarchy, whatever you call it, the one central leader is the natural form of government, not just for Iran, but for all people. That's why people gravitate towards Trump. It's not the Republican Party, it's the figure of Trump himself. And this is basically what's happening here.
Pour remplir. Mais Khomeini n'avait pas les moyens.
But Khomeini did not have the means to take over power as such. It was going to take a whole series of events to transform him from being a kind of anti-Shah to becoming a kind of duplicate of the Shah. And it would be a diabolical process.
En une sorte de reproduction du Shah. C'est une dialectique infernale.
As in other revolutions, it was violence that made the growing divisions clear. In May, Ayatollah Motaheri, one of Khomeini's closest advisors, was mysteriously assassinated. His death heightened the emotions surrounding the debate on what should be the shape of the new constitution. To the liberals and many of the left, Islam was to be separate from the state and parliament would be sovereign. But to those Islamic parties that drew their inspiration from the writings of Khomeini himself, sovereignty belonged to God, not to the people. I mean, yes. I reckon if I was there, I'd have been on their side as well. Their society, political power would lie with the supreme guardian who interpreted God's law.
It was struggle for power. It was struggle for power. I mean, it was, if you like, the exact opposite of what was the main characteristic of the pre-revolutionary days. I mean, then the Iranian Revolution was the most united, the widest possible revolution, I think, of all times. I mean, it seemed that almost in its last days, it was like everybody together.
Et au fur et à mesure, ça commençait à dégrader.
But little by little, it all began to fall apart, and the fundamentalists began to come and attack people who were in political discussion. And then they would shout slogans about Khomeini, fundamentalist slogans.
Khomeini est des slogans assez intégristes, au fait.
As in the French Revolution, the crowd, the mass, was now fragmenting. Parts of it were becoming a force.
The crowd is passive, the crowd is feminine, the crowd must be led. The crowd must be seized by the scruff of the neck and made to do your bidding. This is all crowds ever. This is the nature of power. The crowd on its own is nothing.
To be used by those who wanted to push the revolution on, past the attempts to reform, to compromise with the country's corrupt past, towards instead their idea of a completely new sort of society.
Officially, Iran is now ruled by Prime Minister Bazargan, but real power is in the hands of Ayatollah Khomeini and the Revolutionary Council.
Now that sounds like Jeremy Paxman. Can't be for sure, but it sounds like Jeremy Paxman. I don't know why he's doing a little cameo in this documentary, but sounds like his voice.
During the Shah's time, this building housed Iran's parliament, a largely nominal democracy since he ruled as an autocrat. Today, the building is the headquarters of the Central Comité, Tehran's version of the Paris communes of the French Revolution. Real power on the streets of Tehran lies not with the Prime Minister and Cabinet, but with the committees led by Ayatollah Khomeini's
The struggle for
clergy.
power intensified.
Notice the on-the-ground organisation. Who says organisation says oligarchy, and you can literally just see it on the ground. Those dudes were organised. The Ayatollah was organised. The others, you know, muttering on about democracy or some bullshit. So of course they were going to get outmaneuvered.
In August, the Comité ordered its guards to close down the newspaper Ay Endigan, which had consistently criticized the fundamentalist concept of the Islamic State.
The paper has been what we consider anti-revolutionary from the very beginning of the revolution.
Now, I don't know who this guy is, by the way, but when I watched it with my brother, we were both convinced that he does not have typical Iranian physiognomy. He doesn't look like a typical Iranian. I actually thought he could be from India or somewhere like that, but we are skeptical as to the ethnic background of this fellow.
Its articles have not been aimed at unifying the people or in any direction at all to that end.
Is that an argument for shutting it down?
No, we didn't shut it down. Ayatollah Khomeini said after the last article, in which was a fabrication, he said, "I will not myself buy this paper again." That is all he said. But that is enough.
But isn't that freedom of the press up to the point where the people, guided by Ayatollah Khomeini, decide that freedom shan't exist any longer?
Well, you see, if the majority want this, then this is democracy.
They arrested the Council of the Writers of Ay Endigan and its editorial board. Whoever was there was arrested. Of course, we in the National Democratic Front felt this is the way, this is the day that we should make a very, very important stand. If we do not make a stand here for the freedom of press, we have not accomplished our duty to the revolution. We called for a rally in Tehran, in which almost 1 million persons turned up on the roads, a march towards the Prime Minister's office. We were attacked by organized Hezbollahis. They attacked them with knives, they attacked them with stones, they attacked them with bricks, which they brought with them. Lorries loads of them were brought with them.
But you have to understand, I mean, this is presenting this like a tragedy, this documentary, but you have to understand that if they were serious about taking power, there was absolutely no way they could let a rival run a newspaper, because newspaper is literally just an arm of propaganda. So obviously this was going to happen. You have to expect this to happen, right?
They would unload them and they threw them.
The people they actually mobilized were the lumpens, the unemployed, but especially many of those who'd moved in from the countryside and mainly lived in the shanty towns around Tehran, who could only fall back, who had not been integrated within the urban society, and who could be mobilized and who could get excited about and who felt...
Yeah, you can see the little bio-Leninist element here. Get in the lumpens, get in there's your Antifa shock squads and BLMs and so on. You know, it's very useful for power to have those elements. So, you know, of course they're on the side of the regime, of you know, the new regime here.
Secure only in terms of within a religious milieu, and in terms of religious slogans and religious imageries, and Khomeini and his radicalism and his authority, you know, just gave them all they needed. They became their mob to confront the other groups and organizations which basically drew their support from very definite layers of the urban society, from students, university students, high school students, government employees, teachers, professionals.
In October, when fundamentalist students occupied the American embassy, Bazargan finally resigned. Power had now firmly shifted from the liberals to the Islamic revolutionaries. But the new constitution that installed Ayatollah Khomeini as supreme authority also provided for a president, and in January 1980, Abul Hassan Bani Sadr was elected. Although he was close to Khomeini, Bani Sadr interpreted his 75% majority as a mandate to pull back the power that had slipped to the mullahs.
I wanted to realize the principles for which the people had made the revolution. These were freedom, which I wanted to re-establish, and independence. All of this would be within an Islamic identity. And I deliberately stood as a candidate because of the mullahs' claim that the people were following Khomeini. I said no, it's the opposite. It is Khomeini who has followed the people.
I mean, that was your fundamental mistake, mate. It is never bottom up. It is always the people who are following the leader. Never the leader who's following the people.
Les mullahs disaient que le peuple a suivi Khomeini. Nous disions non, c'est le contraire, c'est Khomeini qui a suivi le peuple.
Bani Sadr had learnt his revolutionary theory not just on the streets of Tehran, but also as a student in the Paris riots of May '68. His imagination had been captured by their apparent spontaneity, and in his Islamic society it would be the people whose spontaneous actions had brought the Shah down who would be the interpreters of God's will. In its peculiar mixing of Western revolutionary theory and Islam, it was a far cry from Khomeini's concept of the supreme political authority of the mullahs.
So how did we try and stop the mullahs' march towards dictatorship? Simply by encouraging the people to remain politically active, to put them, if you like, face to face with the mullahs.
De rester sur la scène politique. Et si vous voulez, mettre le peuple en face des mullahs.
By the summer of 1980, many of the young revolutionaries who had stood side by side against the Shah now began to fight and shoot each other openly. Radical left-wing groups such as the Mujahideen, who offered an alternative to the fundamentalist vision of society, began to attract thousands of followers as Iranian society polarized.
Now imagine you're in the position of the mullahs here. You've got radical organizing left-wing groups. You have to crush them. You have to absolutely crush and eliminate them if you have any hope of holding on to power. So all those lists that we saw were all these people. So, I mean, it kind of stands, I just think it's inevitable that they would have to do that. And if the left-wingers had won, they would have had to do the same to the other side, as left-wing revolutionaries have done throughout history. This is just the nature of taking power in a country.
Originally, they had supported Khomeini for his radicalism. Now, in the struggle for power, they found themselves attacked as hypocrites who would destroy the revolution. But it was a revolution that was, in fact, spinning out of control. On the 22nd of...
Oh, here we are. This is the bit I have to skip past these dead bodies. Sorry. It's probably already too late, but I have to skip past this bit because I think this is the bit which is going to trigger it. Oh, shit. Okay, right.
Of the 20th century. But its immediate effect was to bring yet more suspicion and fear. As in revolutions before, political opponents now saw each other as potential or actual traitors, and revolutionary guards used the war as a pretext to search for and arrest anyone they considered subversive. In an atmosphere of crisis, Bani Sadr rapidly became the focus for a broad opposition, one that ranged from the Mujahideen to moderate liberals. The mullahs, whose power lay in the Iranian parliament, saw his growing popularity as a direct threat, and in June 1981, they persuaded Ayatollah Khomeini to allow them to put forward a motion for his impeachment. Once again, the mob was to play a crucial role.
Il avait décidé que 5 heures, ce sont des députés qui parleront contre.
They had decided that the deputies would have 5 hours to speak against me, and I would have 5 hours to defend myself. But it was all set up to prevent me replying. That is why I asked Khomeini to publish a notice in which he officially guaranteed that I would leave Parliament alive after my reply.
Publier un texte, s'engager officiellement que je peux sortir vivant du Parlement après ma réponse. C'est jamais arrivé. Jamais.
It never arrived. Never.
Look. Now, I couldn't figure out what that was about. But look. Why did they make that sign? And also, why did Adam Curtis slip that in? So anyway, an interesting little detail, that's all.
So it was clear that if I went to Parliament, they might kill me, even before I got there, and claim it was the people who had done it. What it was, in fact, was a coup d'etat.
So they decided to depose him. So the idea then was, we should resist this, right? We should resist this. And that was signaled by the huge demonstration, basically called by Mujahideen.
Were you there?
Yes.
The demonstration attracted thousands from across the spectrum of political opposition. Its size shocked the fundamentalist parties. It was a direct challenge to the power of their revolutionary organizations, using the methods that had worked so well against the Shah. From the comitees, the orders went out to kill. In the Parliament building, the debate took place in an atmosphere of menace. Many of the deputies who supported Bani Sadr did not turn up, fearing they would be attacked or arrested. Then the result was announced.
I mean, it's a mental and scary atmosphere. When the Edmund Burkes and so on are absolutely terrified of the prospect of a revolution ever happening. This is why, because it's, you know, it genuinely is frightening.
That demonstration was the bloodiest ever, in a sense. I mean, it was attacked by the Revolutionary Guards, by the neighborhood committees. It was defended at various points with arms. Various people were killed.
Oh, so many dead shots. So, oh no, okay. Oh no, okay, let's get back to this dude.
Of the Reign of Terror.
Bani Sadr fled into hiding. The Mujahideen and other opposition groups declared armed resistance to the regime. Street battles broke out in Tehran and other cities. And in the north, Kurdish rebels stepped up their attacks.
I think earlier I'd lost my own illusions about where this revolution was going. But I think many had great illusions still left. But all of a sudden they saw that, the whole thing has ended and something has begun which just in their worst nightmares they couldn't imagine.
Both sides used the tactics of terror. 6 days after the
it's just endless dead bodies. What can I do about it? Okay, let's carry on.
Shah. There they were shown on television, repenting and pledging their allegiance to the party that now ruled Iran, Hezbollah, the party of God. Many thousands were also executed, in Evin sometimes over 100 a night. They were under the control of the revolutionary prosecutor Azadollah Lajewadi.
What he did after the Reign of Terror was, on the one hand, go for immediate executions and declaring it, coming out on television saying we are going to kill, giving interviews, showing and coming out and saying, no, we are killing. And in fact, they went so far as killing some members of...
There's just so many dead bodies in this documentary. I'll try to skip on again.
Right there, I mean, that came out. Their identities are known to many of the revolutionaries who were killed by Lajewadi. But in that sense, it was very effective. I mean, that here there is no joke. It's absolute terror.
For those who want to make war, there is severe treatment. But the people themselves are in favor of the regime. The people themselves, when they give 16 million votes to our president, Mr. Khamenei, it shows that the people are satisfied.
So the current Ayatollah, Khamenei, became the president. That's who he was referring to. This dude, Rafsanjani, was a big power broker within the regime for many years, until he was killed a few years back.
This rule is the rule of the people themselves.
I heard that one of my brothers had been executed. And when I heard the news, I was so shattered, so sad. I just couldn't understand. I thought, it's impossible. So many people had died for this revolution, just for the sake of going backwards, to have yet another fascist. It's just not possible for a revolution to go this way.
Why do you think that? I mean, had you never once picked up a book? Why did you ever think that?
Un autre fasciste, c'était pas possible. En plus, je veux dire, j'arrive pas à comprendre.
But also, I can't understand how people can kill, can execute, can torture another human being just because of his thoughts. It's something I'm never able to understand. I don't even want to understand. It's so bloody vile. It's so terrible.
J'arrive jamais à comprendre, je veux dire, et je ne cherche même pas à comprendre. Je veux dire, c'est tellement dégueulasse, c'est tellement terrible que...
Or do you think it was a free marketplace of ideas, and whoever wins the debate gets to have power?
Je sais même pas quoi dire.
This is Père Lachaise in the heart of Paris and not Tehran. This is a very important and famous cemetery where many exiles are buried, including Iranians. Iranians who fled from the terror of Khomeini, mostly from 1981 onwards. Of course, this is the gravesite of Ghulam Hussein Saadi, a very prominent Iranian writer and political thinkers. But at the same time, the Iranian resistance had come abroad, and Paris had become the center of the Iranian opposition. One of the most important reasons for which I came to Paris was to do something about Khomeini, together with the rest of the opposition which had gathered here.
The first mass revolution brought with it the first terror to Paris in 1793. Thousands of suspected enemies of the revolution were taken to prisons, such as the Conciergerie. From there, they were driven daily through the streets of Paris to the guillotine. Faced with invading armies and with plots to overthrow the government, a small minority of revolutionaries, led by Robespierre, turned to terror as a method of preserving their idea of the revolution.
C'est la même chose qu'a fait autrement Staline.
It was the same thing that Stalin did during the Russian Revolution. Up to the point where he did not feel himself threatened, Stalin accepted the ways of the Bolshevik Party. But from the moment he realized that movements within the party were leading to his own elimination, he turned to terror.
Allait aboutir à son élimination. Il a utilisé la terreur. Dans la révolution iranienne, c'était la même chose.
In the Iranian Revolution, it was the same. A small minority took advantage of the danger created by the war and the onrush of the revolution to seize the reins of power, and then it used terror as a means of governing.
Et pour pouvoir se maintenir en place,
every revolution ever, what he just described. Very apt description of every revolution ever, pretty much.
Il a utilisé la terreur comme un moyen de gouvernement.
But Robespierre's problem, as it would be for many other revolutionaries in the future, was how to justify the use of terror, yet still persuade the people that the aims of the revolution had not been destroyed. At the height of the executions, Robespierre made a speech in which he tackled this problem head-on. Terror, he admitted, was the main force behind despotic government, the very sort of government that the revolution had fought to destroy. But for a revolutionary government, terror was something very different. because it meant the destruction of those whose moral corruption barred the way to a new society of virtue. Terror has now become, he said, the despotism of liberty against tyranny.
Amazing. BS, 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 BS. Therefore, we rule.
Another of the Jacobins, Saint-Just, put it more simply. We must force the people to be free.
They were forced to be free, all right.
And this is the other legacy of the French Revolution that has echoed down through many other revolutions of the past 200 years. That there comes a time when to preserve the purity of your revolution and your power, it is necessary and justified to kill. In order to regenerate a society that is not fully aware of what is good for it.
Did you hear the Palpatine coming out in his voice when he said that as well?
I think most of them were doing it because they thought, here are infidels, here are enemies of God, here are those who are rising against the government of Allah, you know, and his representative on earth. I think that for many, it became so easy to do it, because, as many other revolutions in the past had done it for the sake of history, right? History, you know, history would justify it. I mean, history demands you to kill. I think these people thought that they were doing it for the sake of God, that they were doing it following the God's commandment.
Can you compare it to something like the terror in the French Revolution?
To the extent that it was done self-righteously, to the extent that it was done for high motives, for ideals, you know, I mean, to that extent, it wasn't done for petty advancement by many, I think. To that extent, they're comparable. I mean, they're comparable to terror in any other revolution where it's done for selfless motives, if you like, you know.
But as we've seen throughout this documentary, this guy is a massive romantic. So if he'd been in a position, he would have done the killing too. He just had different BS from the Ayatollah's BS. That's all it is. His BS was different BS. But he would have done terror too. You can hear it in his voice. He is turned on by the idea of the high ideals. And ultimately, that's what it turns into.
But I think intertwined with that, and how can we separate it? I think is power. Is the lust for power? Is the losing of power? I think that was very much there too. I mean, remember this. Here where, I mean, Iran in this sense, in some ways maybe also like the French Revolution, but certainly more than the Russian, than the Chinese, and many others. Here was a real revolution in the sense that many people from the lowest stratus of society were brought to where they felt now they were on top. Now they were on top, and now I think there was also an element of revenge. Don't forget that it was, I mean, that element of revenge I think was very important, was central, was there.
That is undoubtedly true. There was a class element to what happened here because the base of the revolution was peasantry. And as you saw, a lot of the people who got it were middle class. But what this documentary has soft-pedaled is the fact that many of those middle class people were out and out commies. They were just out and out commies. As you can imagine, they were guys like this guy here, right? You can tell with his language is a leftist. You know, who call, you know, lumpen is commie speak. You can tell this guy is one of, you know, is a revolutionary Marxist or something. So of course they fucking had to kill him.
I mean, remember that the Shah, just on every level, these people felt degraded from Khomeini and Beheshti down as mullahs, as the representative of an old dying culture in Iran. They felt degraded. They had this vengeance and they wanted to let it out. And I think that shooting, see, who were they shooting? Who were they killing? They were killing the cream of the Iranian society. Remember that. They were killing the brightest university students who usually would become political. They were.
I mean, the cream. You see, you've got to. There's a way of. You've got to think about this, though. Imagine something like this happened in America or in Britain, okay? Would the university lecturers and the middle classes, in your view, be the cream, quote unquote? So I'm just trying to make you understand in a way the flip side of what this dude is saying, because, or what this documentary is trying to present, because it's debatable as to whether the supporters of the regime or the supporters of the Ayatollah would have seen these people as the cream. You've got to remember, the Ayatollah was saying, like, we don't want Western decadence. We don't want, I mean, regardless of how Iran has turned out now, okay, at the time, those people were motivated by kicking out the West. We don't want your modernity. We don't want your degeneracy and all this sort of thing. So those are the sorts of things that were motivating those people. So yes, there was that resentment there, but you've got to remember what that resentment was fueled by. It would almost be like, you know, it's not an exact analogy, but it'd be like MAGA supporters taking on the SJWs or something like that. You know, in the eyes of the typical MAGA supporter, who are the equivalent, I guess, in American society to these people who support the Ayatollah, the middle classes or the, you know, the university professors and so on are their enemies. They're just enemies in the friend-enemy distinction, because they, you know, well, because of all the reasons you know. So just trying to like present the other side in a way.
Killing the brightest high school students. They were killing these modern political women, just you know, what they hated. And I mean, they were killing professionals, physicians, lawyers. They were killing a kind of society that had been developing in Iran for the past, you know, 100 years.
Today, in other words, they were rejecting a Western liberal or even Marxist notion of progress, is what they were rejecting. They had a different idea of what they wanted the country to be. I mean, for as bright as this guy is, he can't seem to articulate that.
Iran, thousands and thousands of people on a march, in a procession which is both religious and political. These are the poor of South Tehran, and the fuel and basis of Ayatollah Khomeini's revolution. As long as they support the Ayatollah, it doesn't matter if cabinets are decimated by death, exile, or disgrace.
This sequence is a very Adam Courtesy touch, by the way. Even though this is still very early in his career, he's, you know, this is clearly a very Courtesy sequence.
Ayatollah Khomeini had now established his idea of a revolutionary Islamic society in Iran. But in the process, he had used terror to create that new order. Like the French Revolution, it also became a regime committed to exporting its ideas, ferociously criticizing those in the West who would criticize it.
I mean, he's arguably one of the most, certainly since World War II, one of the most personally powerful people that existed, I would say. You know, And there's a weird thing I think a lot of the time where the kind of like the great men of history, capital G, capital M, they've got like a kind of special charisma about them. They look different. I've often thought that about Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and just like or there's something that marks them out, where they just look different from everybody else. Because this guy, he's like he's from a different planet. Anyway, let's carry on.
And America had used violence for over 50 years to dominate Iran as part of their empires. Yet now, like hypocrites, they pretended a concern for human rights.
To serve Islam is to serve mankind. Mankind is today enslaved in the hands of those who supervise them in tyranny. All nations are caught in the talons of these powers who consider themselves pious and competent.
بنای آلبرت، بنایی در کنار هاید پارک در شهر لندن، بنایی که هرچند از نظر هنر معماری و مجسمه سازی برای خود نام و نشانی دارد، اما گویای تاریخی تلخ از ستمها و ظلمهای استعمار انگلیس بر ملل مستضعف مناطق مختلف جهان است. با نگاهی گذرا به این بنا در میابیم که چگونه امپریالیسم تفکر سلطه‌جویانه و برتری طلبانه خود را نه تنها کتمان نمی کند که آن را در معرض نمایش هم می گذارد.
There are those who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, who said if one slapped your face, you should turn it so that he would slap it on the other side. Jesus Christ would not make such an error.
I mean, what does he mean by that then? He's claiming that Jesus didn't say that. He didn't say that Jesus said that? Or Jesus in the Quran doesn't say that, does he?
Do you think that we in the Western press and the Western media can sit and make simple judgments of right and wrong about issues such as human rights in a process as complicated as the Iranian Revolution has been?
Je ne crois pas qu'aucun peuple,
I do not believe that any people or individual has the right to judge a whole nation with simplistic and short judgments.
d'un autre peuple avec des jugements simples, résumés. Mais pour la Révolution française, cette période de la
But for the French Revolution, this period of terror was relatively short. For the Iranian Revolution, sadly, it is clear that the terror is not
on voit
finished.
que la période de terreur n'en finit pas. Pourquoi n'en finit pas? Une des raisons
Why is
les
it
plus
endless?
importantes,
One of the most important reasons is that Khomeini's
This guy has a vibe like he hangs out in Parisian cafes all day talking politics. He's just got that vibe about him, that he's just obsessed with politics, this guy. That would be me if I had anyone to talk to. I don't. Just all of you.
idea of the society he wants to create in Iran is not clear.
pour faire
Somebody's saying that Jesus does not actually speak in the Quran. What does he do then? He's just described, is he? Or, I mean, I haven't read that part of the Quran. Well, I started reading the Quran. I just got bored. So, you know.
une société en Iran actuel n'est pas claire elle-même. Ce projet n'est pas clair. D'une part, il y a l'utopie de retour à
On the one hand, there is a vision of a utopia that goes back to the society of 14 centuries ago. But that is an anachronism. Iranian society is actually a complex society of the late 20th century. This means that Khomeini's Islamic rules and ideas that have remained static for centuries must be exploded and reshaped to fit today's society.
de l'ensemble religieux qui est resté pendant des siècles immobile se bouleverse, s'éclate, s'explose et se reconstitue sur les modèles de la société actuelle.
You have been hanging out with French intellectuals too much, my friend.
Ou il faut que
Or
la
Iran,
société
on the other
actuelle
hand, will have to
soit
regress
réduite,
to fit the
soit
image of a
régressée
tribal
à
society
l'image
of 14
d'une
centuries
société
ago.
tribale
This is not
de
possible,
Médine,
and it is this tension that is the root of the violence.
C'est ça qui crée une violence.
In the French Revolution, the safety afforded by victory in war began the end of the terror. For Iran, the war went on and on, its cemeteries becoming elaborate memorials to a crusade that seemed without end. By the spring of 1988, Iran prepared to accept the United Nations ceasefire, and at that point the Mujahideen invaded from their bases in Iraq. To the regime and many ordinary Iranians weary of 8 years of fighting, this attack was pointless treachery, an alliance between the opposition and the enemy. The invasion was repulsed, but in the climate of insecurity created by the failure to win the war, it gave another twist to the machinery of terror. Thousands of political prisoners from all opposition groups, some who had been in jail for over 6 years, were asked to repent. If they refused, they were executed.
We all were part of the revolution. Our families also were part of it too. But a large number of them have been executed recently. Reza says that his brother was executed. Following his execution, Reza's brother-in-law was executed. His cousin was executed. And also his another cousin, who was the 13th member of his family, who were executed. When his family went to know about the body of the prisoners, they told her that.
I should say, by the way, that because they just skipped over the Iran-Iraq war really quickly, my take on that, or my view, I mean, I've noticed there are a number of Iranians here watching this show who I happen to know are Iranian. My take on that is that the Ayatollah, or the regime, if you want to put it that way, made a mistake after they repelled the initial Iraqi attack in 82, year I was born. They should have just called it quits because they'd won. They completely won after the initial invasion by the Iraqis. Instead, they decided, right, we're going to go all the way to Baghdad now. So they launched a counteroffensive, and that was what gave the Americans and the sneaky Israelis who were funding both sides of that at that time, and in to arm Saddam to the back teeth to bog down that war for another 6 years. Basically, it was the counteroffensive. They should have just called it quits in 82. Tell me I'm wrong, because they easily won that first bit of the war, and it would have been a galvanizing victory that the country could have coalesced around, rather than dragging them into another 6 years of bloody conflict. Anyway,
they haven't been buried as such. They are all being put in a cemetery far away somewhere in Tehran. So it was up to the families themselves to find the bodies of.
I think it's a matter of record that they are on both sides in that war. They did. The Israelis were definitely selling weapons to Iran at that time. I think that's a matter of record. If it's not, they did. So
their beloved.
I know that I am not alone. I know that there have been many thousands of executions in the prisons in the last year. What is important for me is to know why these people have lost their lives. I remember my husband and I used to talk together. Neither of us could understand how a revolution could become like this. But I also know that without revolutions in the past, the world would not have changed. And for me, the struggle continues against another dictator. I regret having lost a man who had been my best friend.
The reason I was considering skipping over this, by the way, is that because I watched it with my brother and we both agreed that we felt that this was Adam Curtis doing, he was kind of doing a job for the BBC. So he was much more handcuffed by BBC kind of party line and kind of liberal framework, way more than he usually is in his documentary. So, it kind of dwindles into this you know, slightly pathetic, liberal kind of, oh, isn't it all awful? Feel sorry for me type thing. Whereas I feel that Curtis Unleash would have dealt with this whole subject matter in a different way. Curtis fans, tell me if you agree or disagree.
Friend, I loved him and still do, but I do not regret what has happened, because I know that this revolution is not finished yet. It is important to note that my husband did not die for a personal end. He resisted torture and finally died for something he loved. And once one is in love, one is capable of anything.
See, they're just gutted they lost. If it was the other way round, they would have, their whole framing on this would have been like, yeah, it was a glorious victory, and you know, it was good. You know, the forces of repression have been defeated, and all this sort of thing. They were just romantics who were on the long side. We were on the wrong side because they were less organized. Over the course of this documentary, I've concluded that she probably, on balance, is a wood, but I don't want to bring the tone down.
Voilà, ça c'est l'endroit où je suis venue il y a 10 ans.
This is the place where I came 10 years ago because I was waiting so impatiently for the Iranian Revolution. This is where, hour after hour, we listened to the radio for the news of what was happening. 10 years have gone by. Thousands of people have become victims of the revolution. And it goes on. I have lost 2 close members of my family in the executions and many other close friends. For me, this is no longer what the revolution was about. For me, the revolution is what I saw when I first went back to Iran. It is what I had read about in history. But we also know that a revolution always goes forward, never back.
En avant, on fait jamais marche arrière.
Look at that. Her brother gave his life for this, and she still hasn't fucking wised up. Still got that streak of naive idealism in her. All these people have in this documentary. And it's I mean, I think it's necessary to lose that, to be honest. I think that the people who tend to win out in those scenarios are much more ruthless and don't, like, you know, if you read Lenin's Bolshevik writings, or, you know, if you see how the mullahs have been throughout this documentary, you know, no nonsense, none of the nonsense. They just, you know, what needs to be done. So anyway, not that anybody watching this will ever be involved in a revolution, touch wood. This is something else, by the way, that my brother has noted. Adam Curtis loves, and I mean absolutely is obsessed by, this moment. And we're gonna start playing a game. How many times does Adam Curtis use this footage? Because I can think of at least 3 other occasions where he uses it, but this is the very first. He's obsessed with it. Apparently they didn't kill him. Is that right? This guy just, like, they actually just let him go home in the end. I seem to remember reading that nothing happened to him. Tell you what, the balls on him though. That is balls, isn't it? Come on. Tank driver was like, listen, mate, just go home. You've got 2 bags of shopping. Sainsbury's is that way, son. Bugger off. So there we go. That was written and produced by Curtis. I feel that either he hadn't quite found his voice when it came to this, because remember, Oceans Apart was written by the historian David Reynolds and co-written by David Dimbleby himself, and Curtis just did the editing and, you know, the production work on it. I feel that this is not quite the Curtis we know. It felt much more like a kind of workaday BBC documentary, and there was too much liberal garbage in there, in my view. And this is somewhat different from how, even in Pandora's Box, 2 or 3 years later, he would deal with looking at the Soviet Union, for example, or various other things. That was that. But I'm a completionist, and you know, I've got an audience of autists here, so why not? Let's not skip any, right? Couple of super chats before we get out of here. Dyslexic Generator said, I have always had a soft spot for Iran. I never understood why the people around me hated them until I found out why. Coney says, did you ever hear the story of Ayatollah Khomeini the Wise? I thought not. It's not a story liberals would tell you. It's a Shia legend. Nomad says, I'm really enjoying the content at the moment, AA. Well, thank you for that, Nomad. And there's actually been quite a lot this week. I made 3 videos, which is usual for me, longish videos. And obviously there's been the 3 shows that I usually do. So I won't have anything apart from the mellow moments every morning. I'll be back on Monday now. Cigar Stream next week. I've got Sargon of Akkad coming on because he wants to explain how the woke is liberal. I have the view that the woke is not liberal, which I discussed before with Mike from Imperium Press, and Carl messaged me and said, well, I put a little clip on Twitter. Carl said he wanted to come on to basically go through how the woke is liberal. Judge Caligula Bushman says, good content, friend. Well, thank you very much. Dave says, do McDermott and Tony Blair have the same accent? I feel like Ian McDermott is more clipped than Tony Blair and has a cooler voice than Blair. Blair's got kind of quite a high voice, doesn't he? Whereas I would say McDermott has he can go an octave lower. He's probably got a lower voice than I have. The Enriab says, thank you. It means so much. Now get out. Thank you, the Enriab. It means so much. Now get out. Who's says, Watcher, AA. I just wanted to see if you've learned how to pronounce Watcher. Great content, as always, sir. Well, thank you very much for that, Who's. And I think that will be that, unless I've missed any. Brudam says, I'm smoking a Monty Open Eagle during this stream for a mellow moment. Fantastic show. Thanks, friend. That's great. That's great, Brudham. I haven't had a cigar today because it's been raining all day. Maybe I'll go and have one now. I'm particularly into my Upman Connoisseur A at the moment. Connoisseur 1, sorry, at the moment. But yeah, I like I might have a Juan Lopez number 2, the Jaffa cake, or the Ras. I'm going to do one of those, I think, tonight. Feels like the sort of night for that. King Cribble says, missed this, but super chatting anyway. Well, thank you very much for your support, King Cribble. Hussein Daoud says, had this early clerical training in Sufism. Man was deep into the occult and esotericism. Man on the mounting energy. was a reincarnation of Hassan Sabah. Well, yes, and I will say that if I'm ever in a faction that comes to power, I will actually make good on the Ayatollah's promise and go to the mountains and leave the politics to the politicians. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll be back on Monday. You can catch AA Mellow Moments tomorrow morning. Now get out. Do buy my courses, etc.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
Well, that's easily fixed.